The Don steppe at the end of the 19th century did not forgive weakness. The sun beat down mercilessly, burning the grass to a yellow color, and dust storms could hide the horizon for several days. It was in this setting, on the Kozyrin farmstead in the Salsky district of the Don Cossack region, that Semyon Budyonny was born on the 25th of April, 1883. Little Semyon sat on the porch, squinting in the bright light, sorting through worn-out harnesses. His father's hands, rough, cracked, smelling of tar and manure, were his main guide in life. In this family, they knew the value of every penny. Bread was hard to come by, and it tasted salty, either from the salt or from the tears shed in the fields. Budyonny's family did not belong to the Cossack class. They were non-locals, peasant migrants from the Voronezh province. This left its mark. Non-locals on the Don often felt like second-class citizens compared to the noble Cossacks. They had little land and lived in constant need. Poverty was not just a word, but an everyday reality. A cramped hut, meager food, hard labor from early childhood. Semyon, like many of his peers, worked as a laborer. At the age of 7, he was already helping his father, and a little later, he went to work for wealthy peasants and merchants. But he had one passion that set him apart from the others: horses. He did not just know how to ride, he felt the animal, understood its temperament. They say that even as a teenager, he could tame a stubborn stallion that grown men were afraid to approach. This skill, absorbed with the dust of the Don roads, became the first brick in the foundation of his future legend. In 1903, when Semyon turned 20, it was time to join the army. For many peasant boys, conscription was a heavy burden, a separation from the land and family for many years. But for Budyonny, it was a chance to break out of the vicious circle of poverty. He took to the army discipline, which many hated, with gusto. He was in his element. His service began in the Primorsky Dragoon Regiment. Semyon quickly proved himself to be an excellent horseman, strong and resilient. But the real test came with the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905. This was no ceremonial service, but mud, blood, and his first casualties. There, on the hills of Manchuria, the young dragoon Budyonny received his baptism of fire. The war, lost by the Russian Empire, became a school of survival for him personally. Upon his return, he continued his service, remaining on extended duty. By the beginning of the First World War, Semyon Budyonny was already an experienced non-commissioned officer who knew the value of a soldier's life. And here, on the fronts of the Great War, as it was then called, his talent as a cavalryman was fully revealed. Imagine the November slush of 1914. Cold rain mixed with snow hits your face, your overcoat is soaked through and has become as heavy as lead. Budyonny's platoon is on reconnaissance. Suddenly, a German convoy emerges from the fog. The enemy outnumbers them, but there is no time to hesitate. Without a moment's thought, Semyon urges his horse forward. A short, fierce battle ensues, with the clang of swords and cries of battle, and soon the German soldiers are throwing down their weapons. It is courage bordering on recklessness, but backed up by cold calculation. During the First World War, Semyon Mikhailovich achieved what only a few managed to do. He became a full Knight of St. George. 4 St. George crosses and 4 St. George medals, the so-called full bow. This was the highest military honor in the Tsarist army. It was impossible to receive such an award by chance. He received his first cross of the 4th degree for capturing a German convoy with rich spoils. The second, of the 3rd degree, was for participating in a daring attack on the Turkish rear. At that time, they were transferred to the Caucasian front. The 3rd and 4th crosses of the 1st and 2nd degrees were also earned in battles that required personal courage and commander's skill. But there was an episode in his biography that was rarely mentioned in Soviet textbooks. Once, Budyonny lost his 1st cross. This happened because of a conflict with a sergeant who hit Semyon in the face. Budyonny, unable to bear the insult, responded. According to the laws of wartime, this was a court-martial. But, given his combat merits, he was only stripped of his award. However, he later earned a 4th-degree cross again, restoring his status. This incident vividly characterizes his nature: quick-tempered, proud, intolerant of humiliation, but ready to atone for his guilt with action. By the age of 17, Budyonny was not just a soldier, but a respected authority among his colleagues. The revolutionary sentiments that were spreading through the army did not pass him by. Coming from a humble background, he understood perfectly well the aspirations of ordinary soldiers, tired of endless slaughter. When the empire collapsed and the front began to fall apart, Semyon Mikhailovich made his choice. Returning to the Don after the collapse of the old army, Budyonny plunged into the chaos of the civil war. The Cossack region was in turmoil. The white movement was strong here, supported by the wealthy Cossacks and officers. There was no place here for outsiders and the poor. In this situation in February 1918, Semyon Budyonny gathered his 1st cavalry detachment at the Platovsky farm. It was not a regular formation with quartermasters and headquarters. It was a handful of people, only 7, ready to fight for the new government. They were united not so much by ideology as by the desire to survive and protect their homes from white terror. There were not enough weapons, and horses were obtained in battle. Night in the steppe. The fire barely glows, so as not to give away their location. Several people in motley clothing sit around the fire, some in greatcoats, others in Cossack jackets. Budyonny, stroking his moustache, draws a plan for tomorrow's ambush on the ground with a stick. His eyes do not show fanatical fervor, but the calm confidence of a predator who knows his territory. Behind them, horses snort, sensing their master's anxiety. Tomorrow may be the last battle, but today they are here, and they are a force to be reckoned with. The detachment grew rapidly. 7 fighters turned into 100, 100 into a regiment. Peasants, poor people, and former frontline soldiers who believed in his commanding luck flocked to Budyonny. The fame of the Red Commander, who defeated the Whites with their own weapons, a dashing cavalry attack, spread through the villages faster than the wind. Soon the detachment grew into a brigade, and then a division. It was here, in the Don steppes, that the foundations of the tactics of the future 1st Cavalry Army were laid. Budyonny intuitively found the key to victory in maneuverable warfare: speed, pressure, and surprise. He understood that infantry was vulnerable in the steppe, while cavalry could cover dozens of versts a day, striking where the enemy least expected it. During the battles near Tsaritsyn, Budyonny's talent was noticed by the Bolshevik leadership, including Stalin and Voroshilov. This acquaintance played a key role in his future fate. But then, in 1918, the hand of Moscow was not yet so clearly felt. It was a time of popular war, where the strongest and luckiest became the leaders. By 1919, Semyon Mikhailovich was already in command of an entire cavalry corps. It was a formidable force that even Denikin's best generals had to reckon with. Budyonny's corps became the prototype of the legendary steel fist of the proletariat, which would later go down in history as the first cavalry army. And this fist was not created in the quiet of offices, but in the dust and blood of civil strife. So don't think that Budyonny appeared out of nowhere like a genie from a bottle at the behest of party leaders. His path is not a beautiful fairy tale concocted by propagandists after the fact. It is the harsh truth of war, where only the strongest survive, and where every medal is earned not by the signature of an official, but by real feats of valor or bloodshed. And although his image was later polished to a shine, removing all rough edges and contradictions, the foundation of this legend was forged from the most genuine steel. One cannot deny the obvious. Before becoming a symbol of an era, he was simply a soldier who knew how to fight better than others. By the autumn of 1919, the situation of the Soviet Republic had become critical. General Denikin's troops, having captured Ukraine and southern Russia, were advancing inexorably towards Moscow. It seemed that one more push and the Red capital would fall. It was at this turning point, when an extraordinary decision was needed, that the idea of creating a military machine never seen before, the First Cavalry Army, was born. The initiative came from the Southern Front Command. It became clear that scattered cavalry units, however heroic, were unable to withstand the powerful White Cavalry Corps, such as those of Mamontov and Shkuro. A unified, centralized strike force was needed, capable of deep raids and rapid breakthroughs. In November 1919, the Revolutionary Military Council of the Republic issued a decree on the formation of the First Cavalry Army on the basis of Budyonny's cavalry corps. Semyon Mikhailovich himself was, of course, appointed commander. Kliment Voroshilov and Yefim Shchadenko became members of the Revolutionary Military Council of the Army. This triumvirate, Budyonny, Voroshilov, Stalin, who oversaw the front, would later enter Soviet mythology as the unbreakable alliance of the founding fathers of the Red Cavalry. But then, in the smoke of battle, it was first and foremost an effective military-political alliance. Budyonny gave the army his name, combat experience, and unquestionable authority among the soldiers. Voroshilov, as commissar, was responsible for political work and communication with the center. The First Cavalry Army was a unique phenomenon. It was not just a mass of horsemen with sabers at the ready. It included artillery divisions, armored trains, an air squadron, and even armored cars. It was a mobile operational unit capable of acting autonomously, away from the main forces. Its tactics were simple and effective, concentrating forces on a narrow section of the front, rapidly breaking through the defenses and entering the enemy's rear. There, the cavalry sowed panic, destroyed communications, and destroyed headquarters and warehouses. The first serious test for the newly formed army was the Voronezh-Kastorninskaya operation. Here, in fierce counterattacks, the First Cavalry faced the elite units of the White Guard, the cavalry corps of Mamontov and Shkuro. It was a battle of giants, a duel between two cavalry schools. The white generals, hereditary Cossacks and officers, despised the peasant commander Budyonny, considering him an upstart. But underestimating their enemy cost them dearly. Imagine a snow-covered field near Voronezh. The ground is frozen and hums under the hooves of thousands of horses. Two avalanches of horsemen rush towards each other. At the front, on a black stallion, is Budyonny. His famous moustache is covered with frost. His eyes are ice-cold and calm. He does not shout orders. His commanders know what to do. The clash of steel, the gasps of men and horses. The battle breaks down into thousands of individual duels. The cavalrymen may have been inferior to the whites in the art of fencing, but they made up for it with their fury, unity, and faith in their commander. The victory at Voronezh was of colossal strategic importance. Denikin's strike force was broken. The whites began a rapid retreat to the south. The 1st Cavalry Army, pursuing the enemy, liberated Donbass and Rostov-on-Don. Its raids became legendary. The soldiers marched 100 kilometers a day, appearing where no one expected them. However, the image of the liberating cavalryman, later created by Soviet propaganda, was far from the truth. Civil war always involves filth and cruelty, and the 1st Cavalry was no exception. It left a trail of pogroms, looting and violence against the civilian population in its wake. Jewish towns in Ukraine suffered particularly badly. Although the army command issued stern orders to combat looting, it was practically impossible to stop this force of nature. The army, consisting of yesterday's peasants and lumpen proletariat torn from their familiar lives, carried with it not only the red banner, but also centuries-old hatred and dark instincts. In the spring of 1920, the 1st Cavalry Army was transferred to a new front against Poland. The Soviet-Polish War became the apogee of glory for Budyonny and his army, and, at the same time, the beginning of the end of the legend of invincibility. The campaign got off to a brilliant start. The cavalry army broke through the Polish front and rushed towards Lviv and Warsaw. It seemed that, in a little while, we would bring happiness and peace to the workers on our bayonets. But near Warsaw, something happened that went down in history as the miracle on the Vistula. Stretched communications, exhausted troops, stubborn Polish resistance, and, most importantly, strategic miscalculations by the Soviet command led to disaster. The 1st Cavalry Army, advancing on Lviv, was unable to come to the aid of Tukhachevsky's troops near Warsaw in time. The army was exhausted and depleted. In the battles near Zamość, it suffered heavy losses from the Polish cavalry and air force. This was Budyonny's first serious defeat. It was during this period that the tactical limitations of the commander began to manifest themselves. Budyonny was a genius of cavalry breakthroughs, a master of maneuverable warfare in the steppe. But when it came to storming fortified cities or operating in wooded terrain, his tactics failed. He thought in terms of saber strikes and avalanches of horsemen. Modern warfare, with its machine guns, artillery, and aviation, required a different approach. After the defeat of Wrangel in Crimea, where the 1st Cavalry also played a decisive role, the civil war began to wane. The legendary army was disbanded. A new, peaceful life began for Semyon Mikhailovich. And here he faced a problem that many commanders born of war encounter: how to find oneself in a world where bullets do not whistle and shells do not explode. Budyonny, unlike many of his comrades, who did not even have a basic education, understood the need to study. In the 1930s, he graduated from the Frunze Military Academy. He studied diligently, but, according to the recollections of his contemporaries, academic knowledge came with difficulty to him. His thinking remained concrete and practical. He had difficulty grasping abstract strategic concepts. Nevertheless, his authority was unquestionable. In the interwar period, he held high positions. He was inspector of the Red Army Cavalry and commanded the Moscow military district. He became a living legend, a symbol of victory in the Civil War. His lush moustache, Budyonovka hat, and image as a dashing warrior were reproduced in books, films, and songs. Stalin deliberately supported this cult. Budyonny, along with Voroshilov, was the ideal people's marshal, a man from the lower classes, loyal to the party and personally to the leader. In 1935, when personal military ranks were introduced in the Red Army, Semyon Budyonny became one of the first 5 marshals of the Soviet Union. It was a logical conclusion to his dizzying career. The peasant son from the Don stood shoulder to shoulder with hereditary nobles and career officers of the general staff, such as Tukhachevsky and Yegorov. However, tragic events were hidden behind the glittering facade. The end of the 1930s was the time of the Great Terror, which decapitated the Red Army. The repressions also affected his former comrades in the 1st Cavalry Army. Many commanders were arrested and shot. Budyonny, as a member of the military council under the People's Commissar of Defense, signed the execution lists. Historians still argue about his role in these events. Was he a passive executor of Stalin's will, saving his own life? Or did he sincerely believe in the existence of a military fascist conspiracy? There is an apocryphal story about how NKVD officers came for him. Budyonny allegedly met them with his saber drawn and shouted, "Who's first?" He then called Stalin and demanded that these people be removed. According to legend, Stalin ordered that the marshal be left alone. There is no documentary evidence of this, but the story reflects both the popular perception of Budyonny's character and his special position in Stalin's hierarchy. He was not just a military leader, he was an icon, a living monument to an era. To destroy him would be to strike a blow against the very myth of the revolution. But the main test for Marshal Budyonny, as for the whole country, was the Great Patriotic War. Here, in the clash with the Wehrmacht, the most modern and powerful army in the world, it became clear that the tactics of the Civil War were hopelessly outdated. In the first, most terrible months of the war, Budyonny was appointed to the highest command posts. He commanded the troops of the southwestern direction, then the reserve front. But his actions in these posts proved unsuccessful. He tried to use the methods he was familiar with, counterattacks and cavalry raids. But against the tank wedges of Guderian and Kleist, this was suicide. The cavalry, which had been the queen of the fields during the Civil War, became an easy target in the War of Motors. The tragedy near Kiev in September 1941, where a huge group of Soviet troops was surrounded, became his personal catastrophe. Budyonny saw the inevitability of the encirclement and suggested that the High Command withdraw the troops, but his proposal was rejected. When the situation became hopeless, Stalin removed him from office, accusing him of panic-mongering. The marshal was recalled to Moscow. This was the end of his career as an active commander. Until the end of the war, he held secondary posts, mainly related to the formation of new units and commanding the cavalry, which, incidentally, still played a role in raids on the enemy's rear, but no longer determined the outcome of battles. After the war, Semyon Mikhailovich finally became a wedding general. He held honorary but insignificant positions, was a deputy of the Supreme Soviet, and became a hero of the Soviet Union 3 times. His image continued to be exploited in propaganda, but he no longer had any real influence on army affairs. He died in 1973, at the age of 90, outliving all his friends and enemies, having witnessed and participated in the most grandiose and tragic events of the 20th century. So who was Semyon Budyonny? He was undoubtedly a real hero, not a fictional one. His personal bravery, his path from farmhand to marshal, his role in the creation and victories of the 1st Cavalry Army. These are indisputable facts. He was a product of his era, cruel, bloody, but full of titanic energy. At the same time, his image was deliberately mythologized by Stalinist propaganda. A living person, with all his virtues, flaws, mistakes, and even crimes, was turned into a flawless icon. Everything that did not fit into the canon was removed: the pogroms of the cavalrymen, tactical miscalculations, and the tragedy of 1941. The myth proved to be stronger and more enduring than reality. The truth, as is often the case, lies somewhere in between. Budyonny was neither a brilliant strategist nor a spineless puppet. He was a talented, self-taught man, a brilliant cavalry tactician whose star rose on the fields of the Civil War. But he was unable, or did not have time, to adapt when the war changed its face. The legend of the Red Cavalryman with his saber proved stronger than the marshal who faced the reality of tank armadas. And perhaps this is the main drama of his long and colorful life. Semyon Mikhailovich, being a practical man, understood perfectly well that one cannot live on a saber alone. In the interwar period, he threw himself into economic activities related to his main passion: horses. He became one of the main initiators of the creation and development of state stud farms. This was not just a hobby for a retired warrior. Budyonny saw horse breeding as a strategic state task. He personally inspected the stud farms, delved into the intricacies of selection, and could argue for hours with zootechnicians about the merits of one stallion or another. It was with his active participation that a new breed of horses was bred, the Budyonny. It was a versatile riding and draft horse, hardy, unpretentious, and ideally suited to the needs of the cavalry. He saw in it a synthesis of Don endurance and thoroughbred English liveliness. In essence, he was creating a living weapon for future wars, as he imagined them. His view on the motorization of the army is also interesting, which is often presented in a caricatured way. They say that the old cavalryman clung to his saber and horse, rejecting tanks. This is a gross simplification. Budyonny was not opposed to tanks as such, but he was against blindly copying Western doctrines, in particular the ideas of French General de Gaulle or German theorist Guderian about total motorized warfare. His argument was simple and fundamentally sound. He pointed to the vast expanses of Russia, to its famous lack of roads, where tanks and cars could get stuck in the first autumn mud.
But a horse, he used to say, can go anywhere.
He suggested not pitting horses against tanks, but creating mixed, horse-mechanized groups, where cavalry, thanks to its mobility on rough terrain, could support tank breakthroughs, conduct reconnaissance, and operate in forests and swamps. There was a certain logic to this, and the Great Patriotic War partially confirmed his correctness. The cavalry corps of Generals Davator and Bilov carried out successful raids on the German rear precisely where tanks could not pass. But on a global scale, his vision of war, of course, no longer corresponded to the realities of the mid-20th century. The marshal's personal life was also far from picture-perfect. It was turbulent and tragic. His first wife, Nadezhda Ivanovna, a Cossack woman with whom he had fought throughout the Civil War, died in 1924 under mysterious circumstances from an accidental gunshot. The official version was that it was an accident caused by careless handling of the weapon. However, there were persistent rumors that the shot was not accidental and occurred during a violent quarrel. This mystery remains unsolved. His second wife, Olga Stefanovna Mikhailova, an opera singer, was considerably younger than him. Their marriage, which at first seemed happy, ended in tragedy. In 1937, at the height of the Yezhovshchina,
she was arrested on charges of espionage and counter-revolutionary connections. Legend has it that Budyonny, upon learning of the arrest, stormed into Yezhov's office with a saber, but this is most likely a myth. The reality was more prosaic and frightening. The marshal, a member of the Central Committee and Stalin's favorite, was unable, or did not dare, to defend his wife. Olga Stefanovna spent almost 20 years in camps and exile, and was only rehabilitated after Stalin's death. Budyonny himself, without waiting for her release, married for the third time to her cousin Maria Vasilyevna, who became the mother of his 3 children. This episode is a dark spot in his biography, showing how even the most high-ranking figures in Stalin's system were helpless in the face of the repression machine, especially when it came to their loved ones. His participation in the famous Tukhachevsky case cannot be ignored. As a member of the Special Judicial Presence, Budyonny, together with other military leaders, Blucher, Shaposhnikov, Alksnis, sentenced a group of senior Red Army commanders, led by Marshal Tukhachevsky, to death by firing squad. Later, in his memoirs, he would claim that he had no doubt about their guilt. However, evidence has been preserved that during the trial itself, he behaved passively and asked almost no questions. There was a long-standing animosity between Budyonny and Tukhachevsky, dating back to the Soviet-Polish War. Tukhachevsky, a theorist of deep operations and a proponent of total motorization, considered Budyonny and Voroshilov to be cavalry dinosaurs who were hindering the development of the army. Budyonny in turn saw Tukhachevsky as a gentleman, a former Tsarist officer alien to the proletarian army. Personal antipathy, compounded by fear of Stalin, probably determined his position. He chose the role of executor, saving his own life at the cost of his colleagues' lives. During the Great Patriotic War, after being removed from command of the fronts, his activities did not come to nothing. Stalin, understanding the symbolic significance of Budyonny, used him as a figurehead. He was appointed commander of fronts that existed more on paper than in reality, such as the North Caucasus Front in 1942, and sent to parades and reviews to boost morale. In 1943, he was appointed to a position created especially for him, commander of the Red Army Cavalry. He inspected cavalry units, was involved in their recruitment, and monitored the supply of horses. It was important work, but already peripheral. He no longer participated in strategic decision-making. His name resounded in songs and on posters, but his arrows were no longer drawn on the General Staff's maps. The Marshal's post-war years were quiet and honorable. He became a living monument. His mustachioed figure was an indispensable attribute of all parades on Red Square. He sat on the presidiums of congresses and wrote his memoirs, The Road Traveled, in which, of course, all the sharp corners were smoothed out, and the history of the Civil War was presented in strict accordance with the party line. He devoted a lot of time to working with young people, speaking to pioneers and Komsomol members. For several generations of Soviet people, he became the kind Grandfather Budyonny, a fairy tale hero who came from a legendary past. Few people know that Budyonny was a passionate accordionist. He played the bayan masterfully and assembled a unique collection of these instruments. At home, among his loved ones, he could cast aside his marshal's sternness and play Russian folk songs and dances with rapture. This revealed his peasant nature, his connection to the land, which neither high rank nor Kremlin intrigues could eradicate. He remained a man of the people, even though he had been elevated to the very top of power. When assessing his figure today, it is important to avoid extremes. He was neither a talentless stable boy who happened to find himself on the crest of the revolutionary wave, nor a brilliant commander on the level of Suvorov or Zhukov. Semyon Budyonny was a phenomenon of his time. He was a talented, self-taught cavalry commander with natural wit, an animal instinct for danger, and incredible personal courage. He was the ideal leader for guerrilla warfare, where speed, momentum, and the authority of the commander were more important than staff calculations. But his tactical genius was limited to the war that had created him. He was never able to outgrow himself, remaining in history primarily as the commander of the 1st Cavalry Army. His loyalty to Stalin was not simply careerism. For Budyonny, a man from the lowest ranks, Soviet power and Stalin himself were synonymous with justice. The force that Budyonny's connection with Stalin was much deeper than simple professional subordination. It was almost sacred and paternalistic in nature. Stalin was not just a leader to him, but a supreme arbiter, almost a father who had elevated him, a simple peasant, to the rank of marshal. This blind faith, mixed with personal fear, explains much of his behavior, including his silent consent to the repressions. Budyonny, unlike intellectuals such as Tukhachevsky, did not reflect on the nature of power. He perceived it as a given, as a force of nature that must be obeyed in order to survive. His political naivety was his armor. He did not get involved in complex ideological disputes, did not create factions, did not intrigue. He was a soldier, loyal to his oath, given not so much to the party as to the leader personally. This straightforwardness and simplicity impressed Stalin, who saw him as a reliable, albeit not particularly sharp, supporter. In a world where every second person was suspected of double-dealing, Budyonny was predictable and understandable. It is interesting to trace his relationship with other prominent figures of the Civil War, such as Nestor Makhno. In 1919, when the Reds and anarchists were temporary allies in the fight against Denikin, Budyonny and Makhno met. It was a meeting of two worlds: a career non-commissioned officer accustomed to discipline and an anarchist Batka who rejected all authority. According to eyewitness accounts, they treated each other with cautious respect, like two predators recognizing each other's strength. Budyonny valued Makhno's cavalry prowess and knowledge of steppe warfare, but ideologically they were absolute antagonists. When their paths diverged, they became mortal enemies. It was Budyonny's cavalrymen who later dealt the decisive blows to the remnants of Makhno's army. For Budyonny, Makhno was a bandit, the embodiment of anarchic freedom that was destructive to the state. A little-known fact, in the 1920s, Budyonny played an important role in suppressing anti-Soviet uprisings. After Wrangel's defeat, his cavalry army was not immediately disbanded. It was thrown into the most dangerous areas where peasant revolts caused by food requisitioning were breaking out. He acted harshly, according to the laws of wartime, making no distinction between bandits and desperate peasants. This reflected his statist logic. Anyone who took up arms against the Soviet government was an enemy who had to be destroyed. This did not fit in with the later image of the people's marshal, so in his official biographies, these pages were either omitted or described in very general terms as the fight against banditry. His attitude towards technological progress was more complex than is commonly believed. In the early 1930s, as cavalry inspector, he actively promoted the creation of airborne troops. The idea of landing troops from the air seemed to him to be a development of cavalry raids, only in a new, three-dimensional space. The first parachute jumps in the Red Army were carried out under his patronage. He saw paratroopers as winged infantry, capable of operating deep behind enemy lines, capturing bridgeheads and airfields, that is, performing the same tasks as cavalry but using the latest technology. This shows that his thinking was not completely rigid. He was capable of accepting new ideas, but only if they fit into his familiar tactical scheme of maneuverable warfare. In his daily life, the marshal was a man of simple habits, but not an ascetic. He loved to eat well and appreciated Don fish soup and homemade pickles. His dacha in Bakovka was not just a place of rest, but a real farm with stables, a vegetable garden, and a poultry house. He could roll up his sleeves and go to work in the garden or check on his beloved horses. This attraction to the land and to simple peasant labor remained with him until the end of his life. He was very distrustful of metropolitan dandies and armchair theorists who, in his opinion, were out of touch with reality. This trait both made him close and understandable to the common people and limited his strategic vision. He thought in terms of specific battles, not global geopolitics. An interesting detail that characterizes his nature is the story of his famous moustache. He began to grow it while serving in the dragoon regiment, imitating his older comrades. Over time, the moustache became an integral part of his image, his calling card. He took great care of it, and there was an element of artistry in this, characteristic of many popular leaders. Stalin, who himself had a remarkable appearance, understood perfectly well the power of such a visual symbol and encouraged its cultivation in every way. Budyonny's moustache, Stalin's pipe, Molotov's glasses, all these were details that worked to create recognizable and memorable images of the leaders. During the post-war doctor's case and the struggle against cosmopolitanism, Budyonny, unlike many others, did not make any loud public statements or participate in the persecution. He kept to the shadows, going about his business at the Ministry of Agriculture, where he oversaw horse breeding. Perhaps this was a conscious survival tactic he had learned over many years in the Kremlin. When an incomprehensible storm begins, it is better to hide and wait it out. They left him alone. He was no longer a player, but a living exhibit, a symbol of a bygone era, and his loyalty was not questioned. After Stalin's death and Khrushchev's report at the 20th Congress, which debunked the cult of personality, difficult times began for Budyonny, as for many old Bolsheviks. His entire life and all his beliefs were built around the figure of the leader. He could not and did not want to accept the new truth. In his memoirs, he continued to speak of Stalin with unwavering respect as a great commander and statesman until the end of his life. He was incapable of re-evaluating his values. His worldview had been formed in the trenches of the Civil War and had solidified like cement. For him, the exposure of Stalin was tantamount to betraying the cause of their entire lives, betraying the victories that had been won under his leadership. He spent his last years surrounded by his family and honors, but detached from reality. During the Great Patriotic War, after being removed from active command, Budyonny still found a use for his unique knowledge. On his initiative, the Moscow Zootechnical Institute of Horse Breeding, which had been evacuated and practically disbanded, was restored in 1943. The marshal personally sought Stalin's approval for the return of the faculty and equipment, arguing that after the war, the country would need millions of horses to restore agriculture. This was an act of strategic thinking, but one directed not at the military map, but at the future of peaceful life. He saw beyond the immediate operational tasks, understanding that victory was being forged not only at the front, but also in the rear, which would need to be rebuilt. His relationship with Zhukov was complex and revealing. It was a clash between two military eras. Zhukov, the tough and demanding marshal of victory, valued Budyonny's personal bravery, but considered him completely outdated as a civil war strategist. Budyonny, for his part, saw Zhukov as a representative of the new, soulless staff school, where a person was just a cog in the mechanism of a deep operation. Semyon Budyonny was not a fictional character, but a real military leader with proven merits and serious shortcomings. His biography was ideologically embellished, but the foundations of the legend